When in the annals of history has the victim of an unprovoked war of aggression ever been held responsible for the nutrition of the aggressor? Put simply, Israel doesn't have any responsibility to send a single loaf of bread to Gaza. I wonder why so many senators, pundits, podcasters, and European politicians impose this unique standard on the Jewish nation.
Someone just walked onto the Senate floor with photographs, not of suffering children, but of something far more damning. What he's about to expose isn't a policy debate, it's an accusation. Watch.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Arkansas.
Well, here we go again. Hamas is on the verge of defeat, so it's cranked up the propaganda machine once again. Now, Hamas wants the world to believe that Israel has undertaken a campaign of deliberate starvation of the Gazan population. And as usual, Hamas can count on an international media and political chorus to fight their battles for them and try to bully Israel into submission. So I'd like to set the record straight. First, let me observe that no decent person wants to see innocent children caught in the crosshairs of war and suffering from hunger and malnutrition. Israel agrees, of course. That's why, since Hamas started this war with its brutal atrocities, Israel has helped bring into Gaza approximately 96,000 trucks containing nearly 1.5 million tons of food, 46,000 tons of medical supplies, 60,000 tons of water, and around 170,000 tons of shelter equipment. Put simply, children in Gaza aren't going hungry because of lack of supplies from Israel. They're suffering because Hamas uses food and humanitarian aid as a weapon to stay in power. Now, you may see these easels next to me and believe I'm about to show you heart-wrenching images of malnourished kids. That's what some more gullible senators have done lately, and I'm afraid to say gullible might be a charitable way to describe their motives. Much like the New York Times buying hook, line, and sinker the images of Gazan children afflicted with terrible diseases but passed off as malnourished. But no, I have other images to show, namely the immense volume of food that's being ruthlessly withheld from the children of Gaza. Pallets and pallets of United Nations aid are just waiting to be distributed to the children of Gaza. Some of these contain canned goods, such as chickpeas, white beans, green peas, and carrots. But these supplies, at this very moment, are sitting and baking in the hot sun instead of feeding hungry kids. While this situation is shocking, it's not at all surprising. After all, Hamas's infiltration of UN aid mechanisms is well documented. Time and again, we have seen Hamas terrorists divert aid shipments to themselves or loot delivery trucks, only to resell the supplies on the black market at outrageous prices. Last year, this terrorist-infiltrated aid system, managed by the UN and others, allowed Hamas to rake in more than $500 million in profit. Profits that fund Hamas's campaign of terror against Israel and its own people. How critical is this systematic theft to Hamas's grip on power? Well, one of Hamas's chief demands in recent ceasefire negotiations has been the dismantling of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a new charity created specifically to end Hamas's stranglehold on aid and supplies. The foundation has even offered to distribute UN aid for free, despite the risk to its own people. And much of this aid, which is sitting in the sun and partly taxpayer funded, is already inside Gaza. It simply needs to be picked up and distributed. But the offer has fallen on deaf ears because Hamas uses humanitarian aid as a tool to fund, facilitate, and fight its war against innocent children, against Israel, against the civilized world. And Hamas's cheerleaders, apologists, and dupes in Europe and America, and sadly here in the U.S. Senate, once again turn a blind eye to Hamas's crimes, blaming instead Israel and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They demand that Israel agree to a ceasefire that preserves and rewards Hamas, while also delivering even more humanitarian aid to Gaza for Hamas to steal and exploit. They expect Israel to feed the very people who attacked, raped, and murdered.
This is the line that cuts through every headline you've seen for the past year. Cotton isn't debating aid numbers anymore. He's issuing a moral indictment. The argument being made here is that the entire framework of international pressure on Israel is built on a standard applied to no other nation in modern history. Not during World War II, not during any conflict since. The question underneath this moment isn't about food trucks or ceasefire terms. It's about who decides the rules, and why those rules seem to shift depending on which country is defending itself. Drop one word in the comments. Do you think this standard is applied equally?
Innocent Israeli men, women, and children on October 7th. And I would remind everyone, not a few American victims as well. Once again, Israel is facing demands placed on no other nation in the world. I don't recall from my history lessons, for instance, the United States providing humanitarian aid to Germany and Japan in World War II. On the contrary, the Allies imposed naval blockades that led to widespread shortages in those enemy nations. When, in the annals of history, has the victim of an unprovoked war of aggression ever been held responsible for the nutrition of the aggressor? Put simply, Israel doesn't have any responsibility to send a single loaf of bread to Gaza. I wonder why so many senators, pundits, podcasters, and European politicians impose this unique standard on the Jewish nation. Why could it be? But despite all that, despite the brutal slaughter of nearly 1,200 Israelis on October 7th, despite Hamas's continued repression of its own people, Israel is still delivering aid to Gaza, while Hamas rips it from the hands of hungry children. Once again, we see very simply and very clearly in this war who is on the side of justice and who is on the side of evil. And I would ask anyone who places these singular demands on Israel, whose side do you want to be on? And if you truly care about the children of Gaza, as I do, as Israelis do, as any decent person surely does, I would encourage you to support President Trump's statement of moral clarity and strength from earlier this morning. The fastest way to end the humanitarian crises in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator Cotton walked onto that floor not to mourn, but to prosecute, and the defendant wasn't sitting in that chamber. The defendant was the entire narrative that has dominated international coverage of this war for the better part of 2 years. Here is what that moment actually reveals beneath the surface. The debate over Gaza has never really been about food. It has been about legitimacy, about whether Israel has the right to fight a war the way every other nation in history has fought wars, and whether the pressure to feed, supply, and sustain a civilian population inside enemy-controlled territory is a genuine humanitarian principle or a tactical weapon deployed to slow a military campaign. Cotton's answer is unambiguous. He is saying it is the latter. But here is what nobody is asking. If Hamas is diverting aid, and the documentation Cotton cited suggests that is happening at scale, then who bears the moral responsibility for the hunger? The country sending the trucks, or the organization seizing them at gunpoint and reselling them on the black market? That question should be front and center in every conversation happening in Brussels, London, and New York. It is not. And that silence is worth examining. Think about what this means if you are a senator on the other side of this argument. You are looking at photographs of pallets of United Nations food sitting in the Gaza heat, already inside the territory, already delivered, and being told that Hamas has made the dismantling of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation one of its core ceasefire demands. That detail alone should stop every critic of Israel cold. A terrorist organization is negotiating to protect its control over the food supply. That is not a humanitarian position. That is a power position. Why now? That is the question. Cotton gave this speech on July 31, 2025. Hamas is, by his account, on the verge of military defeat. The propaganda machine, his words, tends to run loudest when the battlefield situation is running worst. That pattern has a name in military and psychological operations doctrine. It is called perception management. You cannot win the ground war, so you fight the optics war instead. And the optics war has a willing army of amplifiers in legacy media, in European foreign ministries, and yes, by Cotton's direct accusation, in the United States Senate itself. The historical parallel he invoked is one of the sharpest rhetorical moves in this speech, and the one most likely to be clipped out of context. He said the United States did not provide humanitarian aid to Germany and Japan during World War II. Critics will call that comparison inflammatory. Supporters will call it clarifying. What both camps are missing is the deeper point being made, that the current expectation placed on Israel represents something genuinely unprecedented in the history of modern warfare. No other nation conducting a military campaign against a non-state actor that launched a mass atrocity attack has been simultaneously required to sustain the population governed by that actor. That is not a defense of any outcome. That is a factual observation about the asymmetry of the standard being applied. And then Cotton asked the question he clearly wanted to leave hanging in the air. Why does this unique standard apply specifically to the Jewish nation? He did not answer it. He did not need to. The implication was the answer. And that implication will be the most debated line from this speech in the days that follow, because it pushes the conversation from policy into motive. And motive is where political arguments either collapse under scrutiny or become impossible to dismiss. If this is the analysis you are not finding in your regular feed, you already know what to do. The story is not finished. It will not be finished when a ceasefire is signed, if one is signed. It will not be finished when the hostages come home, if they come home. The deeper argument Cotton is making, about standards, about legitimacy, about who gets to define the rules of modern warfare and why, will outlast this conflict by decades. Because the next war will inherit whatever precedent this one sets. And the children in those photographs, the ones Cotton said are not going hungry because of lack of supply, but because of deliberate diversion, they are the ones who will pay the cost of whatever the world decides the answer is. That is not a talking point. That is the weight of this moment. If you watch this and you have a view, share it. The algorithm buries this content. Your comment keeps it visible. Subscribe if you want the analysis that the headline never gives you. Share this with one person who only gets one side of this story, and drop your answer below to the question Cotton left unanswered, because that conversation needs to happen somewhere.